Now, Joe told me, oh, yeah, we're in this series, Navigating Transition, something of that sort. And there's been lots of messages. I've heard some of them. Incredible message on transition. I said to Joe, I'm not really sure I have a message as such on transition. But what I want to do is maybe just share a little bit of some of my journey. Because I believe in many ways, all of us go through different seasons of transition. It could be changing jobs, changing houses. Some of you moving churches, moving cities, moving nations. There's all sort of movement going on. And sometimes when I speak to people, I'm actually quite shocked at the lack of God involvement in their transitions. I'm actually quite surprised. If your life is very predictable, maybe you should ask yourself, is God involved? Because faith comes by hearing, and the Bible says hearing by the word of God. And God is not always going to just tell us the things we expect to do next. Now, I'm not just saying just do something crazy for the sake of doing something crazy. But I found that people who walk with God always end up being challenged to do things that are beyond their natural mind and the things that don't normally make sense. Does your life make sense? Because mine doesn't. And when I say that, what I'm trying to say is there's some decisions I've made that if you look at the bank account, you look at what's going on, it just in no way makes sense at all. But Abraham is one of our key examples of what it means to walk with God and walk through transition. Genesis 12, in fact, by the way, I didn't plan to necessarily go through all this, but let's just see how far we go down this road. Genesis 12, let's just turn there quickly. Genesis 12, you see what the Lord said to Abraham? It says, now the Lord said to Abraham, get out of your country, get out of your family, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. There is no way this makes sense to any person that is in Abraham's position. It might make sense to you right now because you're reading this and some of you have heard this many, many times. But to consider what God is asking of Abraham here is actually quite shocking. Many of you would identify yourself with a nation. So if I would say, where are you from? You may say, well, I was born here, or, I've got this passport, I've got this. So you identify yourself with a nation, and it's just part of who you are. Imagine if that's stripped away and you are nationless. How would you define yourself? Now, not just being nationless, God then says, get out of your family. So nationless and familyless, no family. So you can't trace him to anyone. That God is trying to rewrite. God's trying to write a whole new history, a whole new plan. God is starting again with Abraham. So he's saying, I'm going to start from scratch. So before I start again, I'm going to first strip you bare. So no nation, and then no family. And then the next thing that's even deeper in my view is get out of your father's house. Some of you in this room can relate with the issues that come without having a father. Right? Because fathers in homes help define identity in many ways. And many people struggle with issues because their fathers went there. But for Abraham, the Lord is saying now, get out of your country, get out of your family, and then get out of your father's house. Can you appreciate that if he followed God and obeying all these three things, how would he define himself? No country. No passport to connect to a country because God said, get rid of it. No family because now his surname, his family name, his name has been deleted from the family records in history. So you can't trace him. And now no father, in essence. That's challenging to think of. But God had to strip him bare because God was going to reform his identity. God had to strip him bare and then God had to build him back up again. So God gave him a new name. God gave him a family. And God gave him a nation. But God had to start from the ground up. And so what we learn from Abraham is, he's known as the father of faith because he's making incredible decisions that are life-altering, all because he's following the voice of the Lord in his life. How attentive are you to the voice of the Lord in your life? In my experience, there are times when God breaks into your normal flow of life. So like you do your job, you get your paycheck, you do this. There are times as you're walking, there are times where he breaks in and brings visions, he brings words that destabilize your whole life. Now, if you've not been there, just keep walking with God. What keeps you going is the anchor of your relationship with him. Now, as I start to meet with people, I'm surprised at how people make decisions in life without actually making sure that they're making those decisions from his presence. Some of you move houses without prayer. Some of you change jobs without prayer. Some of you move cities without prayer. Oh, you know what? It just looks good. See, you're judging with the natural eye. And that is the way of the flesh. Because what looks natural to you, what looks okay to you in the natural, is often deceptive when you look at it from the spirit. This room looks a certain way right now, but from the spiritual dimension, it looks completely different. If you don't believe me, ask Jacob. He thought he was putting his head on a stone, but he actually placed his head on an altar. So when he saw the same place from the spirit realm, it looked very different. Your neighborhood looks different to how it looks in the natural. Some of you make decisions on who you're going to date or court with the natural eye. You're in trouble. Because even your attractions, the things that pull you, those attractions can be based on parts, they could be based on dysfunctions in your own life you're not even aware of. And you start making decisions with your intellect without realizing those who are led by the Spirit, you can't really predict where they are and where they're going. Because the Spirit causes you to make decisions that are often counterintuitive. Now, I'm not saying that just to make the point that you should just make silly moves. Because there's a process for making decisions. As far as, especially life-altering decisions. In my experience, there's often safety in counsel. Some of you come to church, you sit, you have a nice time and you leave, but you don't form community. You don't have people around you that you know hear from God. And so when you're receiving things, or when God is challenging you, first off, you probably will not even be sensitive enough to pick it. Even if you're sensitive enough to pick it, you don't have people around you that are praying you through it. You know, when Jesus was about to make some key decisions, for example, when he was going to pick the 12 disciples, he didn't just do his regular prayer routine. His regular kind of prayer rhythm was, he got up a great while before daylight, Mark 1, and he went to a solitary place, and there he prayed. So Jesus often went to quiet places to pray. We don't know how long he prayed. If it's a great while before daylight, we can just approximate maybe 1 to 4 hours, 1 to 3 hours, something like that. Maybe something, because a great while before daylight, I'm thinking maybe 3 a.m., 4 a.m. to 6, 7 a.m., that sort of time. Now, when he was about to pick his disciples, do you know what he did? He went up the mountain and prayed through the night. He invested a lot of time to make sure that he was going to make decisions that were from the Spirit and not just with the natural eye or not just something that a human being would make. Many of you are making decisions that just look good on the paycheck. Some of you, in fact, I feel there's someone in here, you're about to get into a business deal. You're about to go into business, and the person you're about to go into business with, everything looks good on paper, but there are alarm bells in the spirit. And if all you're making decisions on is just what looks good, you need to understand when it's time to make critical decisions, you need to take some time aside to get into the presence of God, to make sure that you're receiving clarity from him, and that impression you're receiving from him starts to influence your decision making. I've made some major decisions in my life that even sometimes I've been scared of. But I knew the Lord was calling me. And what I want to do is just point you to one or two things, and then I'll go into a passage that I was actually planning to speak on today. So I used to work for this ministry, the ministry that owns this building called the Message Trust. And I just got married, I think it was 2012. And Prayer Storm had been going for some time. Prayer Storm is the ministry I lead. It started in 2009. and Andy Hawthorne, at the time I was working here as a prayer coordinator and also a videographer doing video stuff. So the message started to support the ministry of Prayer Storm, and it started to grow, and lots of great things were happening. So in terms of practically and financially, I had a paycheck, and that was coming regularly from a ministry that was very for what I was doing. Now, I was in a very unique situation because I was serving the Message Trust while I was leading Prayer Storm, which the Message Trust was not controlling. It was like I was running my own vision within this, but I was also supporting this vision, and everything just seemed to be working really fine until I got married, and then the Lord starts to speak to me in a kind of way that was unusual and was just shocking. So when I got married, we had our first child a year after, which was 2013. Yeah, 2013. In fact, he arrived a day before our wedding anniversary. And so, we were both praying, Lord, please, I hope he doesn't arrive on the wedding anniversary because that's going to ruin that day. And we're never going to be able to have a wedding anniversary. Even till date, every time we're like, okay, we have to save a birthday anniversary. Right now, anniversary often gets swallowed up in his birthday. But you know what I mean. Anyway, so he arrived. He arrived a day before. So, we were thankful and all of that stuff. So life was going okay. Prayer Storm was going fine. Everything seems to be going fine. And then I start to feel discomfort. Now, you see, when you enter into a season of transition, sometimes the things that you were okay with, all of a sudden, they start to irritate you. And it's not that the people are bad, but it's that something has changed in here. And so that discomfort, I realized God was saying to me, it's time to move on. But as I'm thinking, well, why would I move on? Because everything seems comfortable right now. Now, I realized that if I stayed, I would have lost my peace. Are you with me? If I stayed, I would have lost my peace and kept my comfort. So externally, I would have been comfortable. But internally, I know something has shifted. I just know. You don't have to tell me. You don't have to prophesy to me. I just know. So on the other hand, I knew that if I were to make this move, I would have my peace, but I will lose my comfort. Are you hearing me? So I had to make a decision. And the decision was, I knew it was time for me to move on. Now, some people, when it's time for them to move on, they just uproot and leave. You need to learn how to leave well. Oh, God told me, and then you're off. I've noticed some people use the word God told me to shut down challenge. God told me. Anyone that's saying God told me all the time, I have alarm bells. God told me. I don't know about you, but God is not speaking to me every second. There are times I pray for hours and I hear nothing. It is not that God doesn't want to speak, but God is particular about what he says. So I'm very careful about saying God told me. Those are weighty words. And I see some people prophesying in ways they just, God said, God said, God said. And by the time you break it all down, out of the word you just received, maybe 20% was truly from the Lord. But because they were accurate in one season, does not mean they're always accurate. A true prophet of the Lord can prophesy from the Spirit of God, but also add flesh into it. So you're receiving the word, and if you're not discerning, you can't tell what's from the Lord and what's from the flesh. But because you think, oh, they're a mighty man of God, mighty woman of God, you just drink everything in. And then you start to make life decisions based on prophetic words. See, this is part of the problem. Some people are making life decisions based on the word that prophet gave them. Did God tell you? The prophet and the prophetic words are there to confirm what God has already been. The Bible says we are led by the Spirit of God, not by the prophets. Now, I'm not saying the prophets don't have their place, but as far as life decisions are concerned, those who are the sons of God are led by the Spirit of God. And guess what? If you're a born-again believer, the Spirit of God lives within you. So you can discern from God yourself. You don't need to have a man of God tell you what the Lord is saying for your life, when you are supposed to have a personal relationship with him. I've seen people make life-altering decisions because a prophet tell them it's time to change your job. But God didn't tell them that. In fact, I've looked at them and said, are you sure God is really saying this? They're like, yeah. And because, I'm the leader, I'm not controlling. I'm not going to try to say you have to stay. Well, if you feel God saying that, I will release you to go. But I just want you to really pray into this. Some people have added extra delay to destiny because of decisions they've made prematurely. So I believe in the prophetic ministry, but I believe it's often that, especially as it pertains to personal decisions in our lives, I believe it's there to confirm what God has already been saying. You don't go to someone and say, God told me you're my wife, so let's get married. I don't care if God told you, as God told them. And if you're going to them and saying, God, you're using your God told you to manipulate them. Excuse me, we are believers who live by the Spirit. If God told you, then Lord, if this is you, then you're going to have to tell them too. If this is you, Lord, then you're going to have to confirm it. You're going to have to show it. I'm not just going to be running over. I'm telling you, some people, see, I call it charismatic gymnastics, and it's madness. Everyone is saying God said, and when we look at the fruit of their God said, it's not God that said it. You told yourself. And by the way, when you're getting into I'm serious. When you're getting into a relationship and your emotions are now starting to get so stirred, you're going to struggle to hear God. Oh, God told me. Well, your emotions told you. In that state, when you're emotionally attached, you can't hear God clearly. You know what you need to do? Go into your community and say, hey guys, I don't think I can hear God clearly on this matter. So now I'm wanting to submit to you. Can you pray with me to discern? Am I hearing right or am I deceived? Is this the Lord leading me or am I just hearing voices? I don't care who the man or woman of God is you think is amazing, never misses. Everyone has missed it before. You thought it was God, but you missed it. So if we are all able to miss it, then there has to be a humility in how we walk with God, knowing that we have to get things checked in community. You're making decisions just based on something you just received without walking it through with people around you. You're walking in a dangerous path. And so while I was working here at the message, the Lord started to stir me. I knew that the Lord was calling me to leave. The great thing about that was, it wasn't like the Lord was stirring my heart, I have to leave. And so I just packed my bags and left the next week. Legally, I could give a month's notice. But spiritually, I felt like it wasn't like I planned it. But I just knew because of the role I had in the ministry, that transition it was not going to happen in a month. That transition took a year. And it took a year because I knew I couldn't just uproot and leave. So with the leader of the ministry, I am already having conversations like, I'm starting to feel like the Lord is calling me to move on from this place. It's not that this place is bad. I just feel he's calling me to do this. And by the way, what he was calling me to was actually, to me, what was just out of my comfort zone. Because what that would have meant was the prayer storm events we were doing that the message was pretty much covering the bills for, it would have meant no more message trust covering the bills. 1, 2, no more salary. 3, I'm starting like again from scratch. Are you tracking with me? And we just had a baby. So now it's not just my decision, it's impacting on my family. Now, the great thing is my wife was already in agreement. See, that's critical. I'm not just saying, oh, God says, and we're doing this, I'm the man of the house, submit. Now, my wife is here. You can ask her. We've been married how many years now? 12 years. In our 12 years of marriage, I've never said to her, I'm the man of the house, submit. I've never said to her, submit. Because if I have to say it, it means I've lost some authority somewhere. Because it should be easy for us to have dialogue together based on what. And by the way, because the Lord is leading me, doesn't mean I just come to you and say, God said, now let's go. I'm like, Rebecca, I'm really feeling stirred about this. What do you sense? Thankfully, she was already sensing it. But if she wasn't, my job as the leader of the house is not to command her to follow me, is to dialogue and pray through to the point where we get on the same page. I'm not establishing my rule in the house like, you must submit. And I see people teach submission in that way. I have a problem with that because the Bible also says submit one to another. In the same context that says wife submits to your husband, it also says submit one to another. So it means there are going to be times where I'm going to have to submit to her ideas because they're better than mine. Hello, somebody. The men are quiet in the room right now. Now, I believe the man is the head of the house. In fact, in terms of head of the home, in terms of heavenly kind of responsibility, if you were to look at authority and hierarchy spiritually, the man has a spiritual ranking and covering of the family. That is biblical. But what I'm talking about is decision making and journeying together. There is a process that has to be. There's a process that we need to go through so that is done well and people are not left in a place of hurt and confusion and all kinds of dynamics of tension just because you've heard from God. You don't know how many people say God said, and then on the fruit of that is a lot of mess around them. If God has said that to you, then you should have some wisdom to know how to steward that. God has said does not mean I shut down my wife's opinion or what she has to say. In fact, sometimes I don't say God said. In fact, I hardly say God said. It's not because God hasn't said, but those words are weighty to me. So what I often say is, I'm really sensing this. I could be wrong, but I am sensing the Lord is stirring me like this. And then my wife is like, yeah, I feel that too. And when I'm submitting something to a leader, I don't go there and say, God said. I would say, I feel like I'm sensing something. I could be wrong, but I feel a real strong conviction about this. So when I went to the leader of the ministry, I said, I'm really feeling the Lord sensing me. I knew that transition, because of the position I had in the ministry, I couldn't just uproot and move on. Some people are not considerate about the impact they have when they just move on and do whatever they want to do, how it impacts on other people around them. Okay, God's told you to move on, so you just move without really thinking about how you're going to leave the place you're moving from. So I had to raise up other people, and I'd been working on that actually. So I had to raise up other leaders, but that transition took a year. And what that means is, over that year, I had several conversations, one-on-one conversations with the leader of the ministry, just talking through the transition. Okay, how can we do this well? I'm thinking of this. I'm thinking of, well, can you do this? Can you do this? Go away and pray about it. I'll pray about it. I'm like, okay, well, I'm feeling more of this. So it was back and forth. We're able to get to a place where eventually, when that year was up and it was time to transition, it was still difficult. But I was so glad that I'd gone through a whole year of walking through this transition. So the transition happened, and it was great. That is why, I've been in Manchester since 2001. I don't do falling out. All the leaders in Manchester, I have relationship with leaders of churches in Manchester. And they're not all deep relationships, but you can't be leading a ministry like Prayer Storm and be falling out with leaders everywhere. Then what prayer are you praying? You have to steward relationships well. So before the Ram Church started, I was part of a church in Manchester. I've still got a good relationship with the leader of that church. I didn't just uproot and leave. Same process. It wasn't probably a year, but it was a few months of having this conversation. I'm sensing the Lord is calling us to join with this new church plant. I didn't leave because I was offended. Did you hear me? Some of you come to church, the pastor preaches something that gets on your nerves, and you just leave. My question is, who sent you there? Who sent you here in the first place? Did you come here because you saw some stuff on social media and it looked good? Or did God send you here? If God sent you here, then you can't leave unless God sends you out. You can't just do what. Part of the problem of Christianity in the 21st century is it's kingless. We don't have a king. When you have a king, it's not democracy. When you have a king, he tells you what to do. Part of our problem is we have no king over us. He's our savior, but he's not our king and our Lord. So we just do whatever we want, however we want. If God sent you somewhere, you stay there until you know he's told you to leave. So even if things are going in there that are bad, God probably sent you there to be part of the solution. Oh, the pastor fell into immorality and everyone has left. Did God ask you to leave? He may have allowed you to stay there so you can pray so that church does not completely collapse. Because you're there to be one of the pillars spiritually. Who knows? Are you hearing me? Now, I'm not saying we just stay with sin and immorality. Obviously, you know me, I preach holiness. But what I'm trying to say is, listen to what the Lord is saying to you. But how are you going to listen when you don't spend much time with him to actually pick it up? Some of you, you're so busy. Your internal world is so busy. Even if God was shouting with a megaphone, you won't hear him. Because there's too much noise. There's too much internal noise. That's why you need to develop the habit of getting alone with God. Some of these things, you will not pick it up until you get alone with God. Then you start to pick things up. You start to have dreams. You start to have a sense. You see, you have to become a student of the move of God in your life. How God works with me is different to how God works with Pastor Joe. His prophetic history is very different to mine. I just had a very significant thing happen recently. And it was one of those moments where I knew this is one of those defining moments where God is speaking to me. Anyone else can tell me I'm crazy, but I know my life is about to change again. So no one else knows. It's like it's those same patterns that he used years ago. He's brought it again. But because I know how he did it before and how he's been working with me, I know something is shifting, but then I'm also not just doing it on my own. God has said, and I'm just doing something. I'm also finding those voices of wisdom around me to walk me through this season. In fact, back to my thing about the message. And so when I made the final decision to move and leave, it was difficult. Because it was like all things just caved in. So before we left to start, because the idea was to leave and start Preston as a charity. So we started all the process, started to get some trustees for the charity. So I think about how we're going to fundraise and how we're going to do this. Some people I spoke to said that we're going to support and this and that. And so in my logical mind, it looked like everything was on track. Like, okay, maybe we might end up being okay. But as we made that move, in all honesty, all hell broke loose. You know, we were renting a house somewhere over here in Withenshaw. The landlord came and says, he basically kicked us out. Well, he was going to sell the house, and we said, well, we may be interested. And so we started the process, and before we realized he wasn't actually interested, but we'd gone far down the process. You know how house buying can come, valuation, this. Eventually, he was like, no, I'm not interested. You have to leave in a month or whatever it was. And like, okay, where are we going to go? In that same month, the people that were going to support the ministry financially, people started backing out. I can't remember what happened. We had to move into my wife. We had to move into my wife's parents' house and, share one bedroom there for a time. I don't know, it was 3 months, I think it was. It was literally like, as we moved into that bedroom, we brought the storm with us into that house because things just went crazy. I think your mom had like some weird health things just happened. I remember at the time, I had a car. And it was like an old rubbish car, but it was kind of working a bit, just getting us from A to B. And I was in a prayer meeting one day, actually up there, I think. And one of the guys I was talking to and praying with, he said, I feel like, because I was telling him how things have just been really difficult. He said, I feel like the next thing that's going to happen is the enemy is going to cause your car to break down. So he said, let's pray that doesn't happen. Guys, we prayed that it wouldn't happen. Lo and behold, one day on the way to church, actually, we got ready to get to church. We got in the car, started the car. Guess what happened? The car broke down. On the way to church. Lord, you've abandoned me. No, I didn't do that. So, no house, no car, no money, struggling in this tiny. And so at that point, I'm like, Lord, I'm sure you said this. Did you say this, Lord? Did I miss you? I'm going through my history, thinking back. Yeah, no, I cannot doubt, Lord, you said it, because I've got my peace. My peace is intact. But my surroundings are so uncomfortable right now. I'm like, what have I done to myself? What have I done to my family? But Lord, I cannot doubt that you said this. So you know what we did? We kept praying and warfaring and contending. I felt like it was a training that the Lord allowed me to go through. It was like the Lord allowed the enemy to come in a certain way just so that we could be trained in a certain way in prayer, even in warfare. Because I knew it was the enemy. The patterns were just so glaring. I couldn't ignore the patterns. It's like, this is the enemy. So I started praying. I think it took about 3 months. And long story short, I think within the space of a week, it was the November of that year. I forget what year it was. Within the space of a week, every single thing shifted to the point that I knew that it was obviously spiritual. You know, the natural things, house, car, finances, charity, everything. It was just like one after the other. Everything just lined up. And I knew that we were entering into a new season. So what I'm trying to say is I won't be here right now if I didn't go through that season. But I wouldn't have gone through that season if I wasn't listening to God. If I did not discern the season of transition that was upon me. I would have stayed somewhere comfortable externally, but I would have missed destiny. I would have got to heaven and the Lord would have shown me his plan for my life. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Well, some of you, listen, I pray this oftentimes. Lord, please shock me now. God has a book about your life. You want to say, Lord, shock me now with what is written in that book. Don't shock me on the day of judgment. When I realized you wrote a lot of things in that book, I completely missed because I was so busy on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, movies, eating. No time to fast, no time to pray, nothing. Hanging out with your friends all the time. Just going to this party, hanging, just the social, I know, social animal, just everywhere, just talking. No time to be alone with God. You're going to miss important seasons. Some of you, it's when it's time to get married, you start to pray. Oh, Lord, I don't want to miss out. Well, you should have been practicing hearing him on smaller things before the bigger things come. When the bigger things, you're like crying out intensely, but you've not developed the pattern. You don't have history with God. Your history is Sunday morning or Sunday evening service. You don't have your personal history. Let's look through your journal. Where the times God spoke and you saw it come to pass. Where the times you heard and you saw it. Have you traced your own walk with God to see the fruit? Can we put you in a village, in some country that have never heard the gospel? Let's just drop you there right now. Transport you supernaturally. Drop you in that village as a Christian. What can your spirituality produce in that space? You and God, no preacher. What can your prayer life produce there? Because your history with God is one of the things that gives you confidence to take like risky decisions when God is speaking and everything in natural does not make any sense. And the sad thing is the 21st century church, oftentimes we come to church to just be like baby fed. Like, it's like the messages that I hear the message I hear from a lot of platforms in the West, even in African settings too, the messages are just babysitting Christians. They're not training them to have a sharper hearing. They're not training them to discern the move of God. Because right now, things are fairly comfortable for us in the United Kingdom. I know we had some riots recently. But I want you to imagine when the Antichrist comes on the scene. And you cannot buy and sell unless you take the mark. At that point, we're going to know who the true Christians are. Because right now you're comfortable, your job is okay. Maybe you might struggle here and there with finances, but generally you're kind of just getting by. Even the government gives you some benefit and all this stuff. Even some churches are receiving gift aid from the government. What happens when the government says, well, if you don't agree with our agenda on sexuality, we're not going to give you any of this. Do you know some churches are going to change their preaching just to suit that? But we're not going to compromise because we are convinced about who God is and what he says. Even if in the natural we're not comfortable, we are going to align ourselves to God in a way where we guard our internal peace. And so I made that decision to leave this ministry. And as I look back on my life, I see that there's some key decisions I've made. And there's some things I've done that when I have conversations to different believers as I travel, I'm like, why don't you just, to me it's a no-brainer. Why don't you just do this? You mean you're about to make a decision this important? Who are the believers around you that hear from God? So what I do is, when I think I have received something that is just counterintuitive and just doesn't make sense natural, I carry it for a while. I pray over it for a while. If it's still there, I'm like, okay. Because, when something comes from the Spirit, especially from the Lord, it sticks. You can try to shake it off. You can try to shout it off. You lift your hands and worship, it's just right there again. It's just, anyone knows what I'm talking about here. I can't shake it off. It's still there. Then you know what I do? I often ask God for a confirmation. But something I often do, apart from just saying, Lord, confirm it to me, whether it's in a message or a prophetic word or whatever, I often find sometimes 2 or 3 people that I know are in my life, that I am convinced about the integrity of their walk with God. I go to them, I say, hey, I'm picking something up. It's been going on for a while. I share the story with them. I say, hey, with what I'm going through right now, I'm not saying this so that you can agree with me. I want you to help me check, is this in alignment with does this resonate with your spirit? Because you're one of the people I trust. I want to hear from you that you will I'm not asking you to tell me that this is the Lord. I don't want you to say that if it's not. I want you to take some time. Sometimes they take some time out to pray. James, let me get back to you on that. Sometimes they're like, James, you know what? As you said it, my spirit leaped inside me. That is the Lord. Now, I don't need them to tell me it's the Lord because I know it's the Lord. But them confirming that in the multitude of counsel, there is safety. And especially if they're leaders, people I respect, it helps me to have confidence, even more confidence, in the step I'm about to take, that people are going to look at me and say, are you crazy? Because that doesn't make Abraham, that is crazy things the Lord are asking Abraham to do. Now, we are in a different context. Abraham laid the foundation, and now we are kind of in a place where we are in a community. Abraham did not have what we have right now. Abraham he had to navigate with God alone by himself in that context. But he's known as the father of faith. And now we are the ecclesia, we are the church, we are a body. We're not meant to be in isolation. One of the enemy's greatest weapons is to get you to a place of isolation. You come to church, you come in, you sit, you listen, you worship, and then you walk out. You don't talk to anyone. Don't build any communion with anyone. You just come and you do your Sunday thing to ease your conscience and you move on. You're not really going to grow spiritually you're not going to grow as God intends for you to grow without community. It's vital to your spiritual development. And so these are the ways in which I have kind of journeyed. And by the way, I did not get into what I was actually going to share today, but because my time is almost up. I remember once, as I've just said to you, I journeyed I was going through a very significant life transition. And what I've just said to you, I did. And so one of the leaders that I spoke to did not believe I was hearing from God. Now you have a problem. Because I've checked with about 2 or 3 people and they're like, this is the Lord. And then this other leader I really respect is like, I'm not feeling that. So you know what that did for me? It sent me into fasting and prayer some more. Fasted and prayed, seeking the Lord. Lord, this leader is not sure, but I feel like, and I came out of the fasting and prayer with more confidence. It's like, I think it's the Lord. So this is where some people miss it as well. I could go to that leader that I respected so much and say, you know, I respect the fact that you don't feel this is the Lord, but I cannot shake this off that is the Lord. And I have some confirmation about it. So I really feel like I need to step out to do this. Now, when I did that, I was still honoring their leadership while not getting offended at the fact that they did not agree with me. Yeah. Did you hear me? Yeah. I didn't take it personal. Yeah. Even though I felt it hurt bad, that someone I respected did not necessarily agree with a decision I felt was from the Lord. As I reflect on that season, I realized God was just wanting me to grow up spiritually. It was like I was like a spiritual child. I was becoming a teenager, and then I was leaving the house. Like a 20-year-old. It's like, okay, time. And so God was wanting me to go through that season of tension to see how I would respond to it. And because I responded rightly, that relationship, God blessed it even more. God blessed it even more in such a way that it was like, sometimes I look back on my life, I'm like, Lord, I'm so glad that I did not allow offense to get into my heart. And then years later, that same leader comes and says to me, James, you know what? You were right. And I didn't even ask them to say that. But it was like God was wanting to just redeem something. But that was so many years later. So what I'm trying to say is, many of us need to develop systems for healthy transition. Don't just uproot and leave a church because you found another church has started down the road that's more popular. Some of you have done that coming here. The problem is you're going to keep that cycle going. Eventually, something may happen here you don't like. You uproot to the next place. It's like a vagabond spirit. You can't settle anywhere until it's like you go to one place and it's the best thing you've ever experienced, and then you stay there, you realize actually they're just normal people, they're not perfect. Something happens, you're off to the next place. So if you don't have a system, a way of really discerning if the Lord is leading you, you'll be making decisions based on hurts. You'll be making decisions based on circumstances. You're making decisions based on feelings. And we are called to walk by faith, not by. So you're called a believer. You're not called a feeler. So when you hear the word of the Lord, faith should be stirred in your heart. And that faith is the basis on which you make decisions. It's not based on emotions and feelings of, oh, I feel bad, oh, I feel offended, I feel upset about this, and therefore I'm going to uproot and move. I'm going to wrap up with this. It grieves my heart because I see many believers just living their lives like ordinary people when they're actually called to be supernatural people. I see believers just, everything about your life is predictable. Oh, you got offended? Just watch. Very soon they're going to be out. They're not going to come in. They're not going to be there anymore because something was done that they didn't like. Is the church about you or is it about him? Does he exist for you or do you exist for him? Ask yourself that question. God is not there to just be your kind of vending machine, just giving you everything you want, when you want, how you want it. And the 21st century church, I believe, needs to learn that he is a king. He is master. And we, even though we are the bride of Christ and all this stuff, we're friends of God, in reality, we're called to be those bond servants. We do whatever he wants. Whatever he says, we obey. Whatever he wants, we do. And I want to just leave you with this. Don't make life decisions. Don't make job decisions. Don't move houses. Don't do things without seeking the face of God. And receiving some kind of peace, direction, sense. So, Lord, are you wanting me to do this? And, sometimes you pray these prayers and you don't receive an answer right away. Like me, I don't receive an answer right away, but I keep praying it. And over time, I start to sense and start to see the way in which the Lord is leading me. The Lord is not always leading us through an audible voice. In fact, I don't think there will be that many people in this room, if any, that have actually heard an audible voice of the Lord before. It's uncommon. It's not a common occurrence every time. But what is common and what should be commonplace is being led by the Spirit of God. And you need to grow in the Spirit to the point where it's easy to discern and pick up when the Spirit has moved from where you are and is beckoning you to come on a journey that's going to cause your life to shift in a radical way, but it's also an exciting journey.